Hey, I'm your host, Mitchell Bernstein,
And I'm your co-host, Logan Liffick.
and you're listening to the Undesigned Podcast. Cool. I think that's fine.
Cool.
Yeah. So, you want to kick it off?
Should we start with talking about current design trends?
Well, before that, way before that, there's something that we need to address because I realized we didn't address it in the pilot, which is fine because it's a pilot, and this is the very first episode, and we're going to be talking to a lot of different people that are designers, that are not designers. You and I are designers, and we make a lot of things. We work with a lot of people, but a lot of people who listen to this podcast, there was like there's a person in England that listened to the podcast, two other countries, and then mostly it's in America. I looked at some of the stats beforehand, and from the last podcast, it's not 1,000 like we wanted, and we said in the pilot.
Very cool.
But it's growing. You know, we'll get there. But something that I came to the realization is that not everyone who listens to this podcast is a designer. And they don't know what design is. And they haven't known what I do for my entire life, even though they've known me before I've been born, even though they've met me like before college. And I've been working on apps and graphic design and typography, so many different types of design, right? But no one, I shouldn't say no one. Some people that listen to this podcast don't know what design is. So I wanted to talk about, for this first part of the podcast, what the heck is design? And kind of demystify that a little bit.
I think that's a very good idea. It's quite true that, I mean, you ask people what design is, and they're like, oh, you do logos, right? Or like, oh, you do websites, right? But I mean, it's just so much more than just these little facets that like people have latched onto that live outside of our realm of design.
And I can't remember exactly your phrasing of it, but I told you somebody said, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm a designer. And they're like, oh, so you like mixing colors or something. I don't remember what it was. And I told you the story, and then you were like, oh, I want to punch their teeth out.
I remember what you said. It was, they said that you make things look pretty.
Right.
And that is farthest from it.
Well, is that? I mean, we do make it look pretty.
I would say it's farthest from it for people that actually consider themselves professional designers. That's more of a hobbyist mindset, in my opinion.
Before we continue, I forgot to ask. What are you drinking?
Do you want the real answer, or
I want the real answer. I think that we started off the podcast with asking, what we were drinking before, so I think we should continue that.
Currently, I have a glass of water next to me, but before we began recording, I went over to my shelf and grabbed myself some Jack Daniel's Gentleman Jack and poured myself a glass on the rocks.
Ooh, look at you.
It was a gift from my girlfriend.
Oh, how cute. I'm drinking the Glenlivet whiskey. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Okay.
But I am drinking an aged 12 years. A friend of mine just dropped off 2 little bottles of it, and I said, why not? Right?
Absolutely. Nobody turns down whiskey.
Well, I regret it. I regret drinking this, but I'm going to finish it. The first couple sips, not too good. The 8th sip, it's decently bad. So back to design. You were saying that we were talking about that person that you wanted to punch their teeth out, and how making things look pretty is not, it's the farthest thing from what a designer does. You can talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I believe that saying somebody just makes things pretty, I mean, it's almost a slap in the face to what we actually do. I mean, there's so much more thought that gets put into it than just dressing something up visually. I mean, I can totally understand how a majority of people outside of our career field are going to think that that is what actually goes on behind the scenes. But I mean, when it comes down to it, there's plenty of research and plenty of, I mean, at least from good designers, looking at the history of design when seeking inspiration for your work.
So, what do you think design is? What is the definition of design?
I have been pondering this since you and I discussed this topic, and I really think it's easier to discuss what design isn't, in a sense. I mean, it encompasses so much that, because I mean, it's not just one area in life that's influenced by design. It's every area, and not just now in 2017. It's been that way since the dawn of any sort of historical record, if you catch what I'm going for.
Sure.
Like even down to cave paintings. I mean, that, or if you look at any sort of like cuneiforms, or if you look in ancient Egypt, I mean, that's a pretty obvious example with hieroglyphics, all the way up until,
okay. So let's stop there.
Now,
let me ask you about the cave paintings and the cuneiform. So, how is cave paintings design?
I would say it's design in the sense that it is a historical record of what is happening. I mean, at first, when people discovered the, I guess you could call them, paintings, drawings, when they found them, they just thought, okay, they're just drawing out what they see. But then when they took a closer look at some of them, there'd be hatch marks next to them. There would be other sort of indicators showing, maybe let's say it's a buffalo, and next to that buffalo there'd be maybe 3 or 4 crosshatch marks indicating that they found 3 or 4 buffalo that season when they were hunting. So it's almost, in a sense, a historical document.
That's interesting, because I've learned that these cave paintings were actually used for communicating ideas. So it was kind of like, I guess you can call them storyboards, in a sense that they communicate what is going on, what kind of animal did they see, and what kind of location, or who owns that place, or kind of territorial aspects of tribes.
I think that's a really good, I guess, understanding of it. I really like that you brought up just the point of like knowing who may inhabit the area in which the paintings are found. I find that really interesting. I mean, that's almost a sign of, almost like a flag. I mean, not
so
visually, but in a sense of
definitely
communication.
Oh, absolutely. But the focal point I'm trying to, I guess, push towards is that the drawings on the wall, the illustrations, the shapes, they're functional. Are they not?
They are. I mean, if they have purpose that is more in depth than just their visual presence, then yeah, absolutely, they're functional.
And for the cuneiform, how would that relate to design?
I would say, when looking at cuneiforms, that it's really, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've learned from them is that they are the first actual documented forms of communication in a written language.
Yes, they are. I would say, I think that they're around the same time period as hieroglyphics, but hieroglyphics aren't necessarily a written
Right. They're
language.
more of a
They're
visual
illustrated.
language. Yeah.
So yes, so cuneiform is the first, I guess, major. Yeah.
I think that's huge. I mean, that's
And just imagine real quick how many people it took to create that, because that was there is no precedence prior to that of any form of written language. So somebody had to come together, or a couple of people had to come together, agree on what certain things meant. So they had to design a system of how they communicate things around them, how they speak to each other, how they describe actions and events. And they also had to, in the literal sense, figure out how people can actually implement this into their own lives. So they had to figure out the tools to create the language physically, as in the chisel and the stones. And then someone else had to figure out the linguistics of how to create sentences or how to create messages.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's I think the most astounding part about it is just how they were able to get people on board with it. I mean, this was a revolutionary idea, and as you said, the amount of people that had to contribute in order to make this a successful idea, it really goes to show that, I mean, being able to, one, create it, and two, teach people how to use it so that they can use it without any sort of supervision, that's a feat all on its own.
So back to the question, what is design then? If it stems so far back in history to the very essence of when we were able to start communicating, is design communication? Is it solving a problem? Is it creating functionality?
I would say it dips into each of those pools pretty evenly. What do you think?
Well, I took some notes, as I always do.
Of course.
I looked online for some stuff. There's a fly circling my head, and I'm going to get it,
chopsticks.
and you're going to hear me scream, aha. So I took some notes, and a couple of places I found some things. I've seen design as problem solving. I couldn't say that before. Design is problem solving. Design is functional. It's not just aesthetical or aesthetics.
Aesthetic, yeah.
Design, the design encompasses communication. It encompasses experience. It encompasses everything around us in every single industry, every single piece of our planet involving humans. So Don Norman, if you don't know who he is, I believe he used to work at Apple way back in the day. We had to read a book about him, or not about him, but that he wrote, called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, which we can link, and highly recommend this book. But the book is explaining different aspects of how design affects our lives and how we can use design to effectively create better products and a better world. So he says in the book, the design is the deliberate shaping of the environment in which, in ways that satisfy individual and societal needs. That word environment comes up a lot when I've looked it up. So somebody else said, I don't remember where I got this one from. Design in its essence can be defined as the nature to shape and make our environment in ways without precedence in nature, to serve our needs and give meaning to our lives. And meaning is another key word I saw not used in many different aspects. I know Victor, our professor, says I don't know who he quotes from, but he believes design is utilitarian. The MoMA learning website describes design as a verb or a noun. So it's not just a thing that you can pick up and put down. It's also an action. It's a process. Steve Jobs refers to how design is all around us. There's a video of him where we'll also link that says, or he says, everything in the room you're sitting in is thought of and created by somebody that just designed it. So everything around you is not accidental. He also says, Steve Jobs says, design is how it works, not just how it looks. And there's so many different types of design. There's service design, product design, UX design, which is user experience design, interior design, content design, music design, visual design, graphic design, industrial design, fashion design, motion design, shoe design, automotive design, stage design. There's so many types. And they're all solving problems. Some, I guess, in a way, or maybe they're all in a way, about communicating ideas in the form of functionality.
I think that's a really good point. And it's more than just looking at like the Herman Miller office chair or the fancy prints you have on your wall. I mean, it's down to the spoons in your cupboard. It's down to your regular old kitchen table chair, or your microwave, for instance, is designed by somebody. It's user tested, and then it's fixed, and then it's tested again, and the process goes on and on until they get it right, and then it ends up on a shelf at Walmart for, I don't know, $80, somewhere around there. So in essence, Steve Jobs is 100% right. Everything that you touch has been designed by somebody.
A lot of people who I'm sure you talk to and I talk to are like, oh, so you design things. That means you make it look pretty. So you and I actually have something very much in common. We work in the digital space.
Absolutely.
Right?
The better of the two.
We make websites, apps. Not necessarily we make them alone. We make, as in we are involved in the process of making products that live online. And I guess you can call us digital designers. Owen Hammond's another designer at IBM. He told me that there's another term or another title he came up with, which was surface designer. So not just digital products, but it also can be print. It also can be, I guess, any other type of surface that involves interaction or involves communication. So I guess I would cover print and digital. But to me, that's also not everything, because I like to call myself an inclusive designer or an accessibility designer, because I worry more not just about how it looks like visually, like how it's functionally from a visual perspective, but how it sounds sometimes. You have to understand how it functions for people who can't see. So in that sense, a digital product that you can't use visually, you have to use another means, like through audio. So not just creating the inputs from an audio perspective, but also creating the ringtones, the sounds, the beeps and the boops when you click a button, when you swipe something, right? So worrying about that. So what we do is not just making it look pretty. Yes, we make it look pretty. That is true. We do that to an extent. I would hope we do that actually perfectly, which is not possible. You and I do make it look pretty, but we don't just make it look pretty. That's a smaller portion of what we do in a grander scheme.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. That term surface designer was really cool because it encompasses a lot. And I don't know, when I got to college, I kind of thought that the point of being in the program was to help us narrow down our focus, but essentially I felt myself more so just pick up tools to use and be able to apply myself in different areas, because essentially as a designer you need to be pretty versatile, but then it's also important to have your specific like bread and butter skill set, but at the same time being able to assist in other areas of other projects.
So being a generalist.
In a sense, yeah.
Okay. Because going into the program, I didn't know much about print, you know? I'm sure you didn't know much about print either.
Oh no, I had a traditional arts background.
Oh, you did?
I mean, it had nothing to do with printing, more so painting and drawing, but
Right,
I had very little knowledge on really just design as a whole.
I came from, I guess I'm self-taught in digital. We don't have any programs that are significantly geared towards, or we probably do have programs at our school that are geared towards digital product design through service, whatever. But
The programs that they have for us digitally, I feel like it's scraping the surface a little bit too much in our specific industry, being that sort of web and app development sort of area. But the other more so digital programs belong to the other majors, like game design has a lot of character animation, but we're still pretty stuck in the print field with our graphic design degree.
I find it very interesting, though, that there's a lot of schools that are starting to focus on actual careers about product design, user experience design, that kind of design. But most designers don't come from a user experience education or product design education. Most of them come from other aspects, and they flipped, and they can use whatever aspects they've learned in that life, whatever paradigms and whatever concepts of that prior profession, they apply it, and it becomes infinitely more powerful for them because they can see it from kind of like when you speak two different languages, you now can see your language that you normally speak from a different perspective.
I think that's a very important part, and it almost goes back to something we talked about in the last episode about sketching. When I was talking to one of my friends at Creative South, and we were just talking about how I, with my traditional arts background, had a lot better handle on sketching, and how I felt like it actually really helped me as a designer in the early stages of developing any sort of work, because it allows you to put your ideas on paper a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. I mean, it's funny because talking about design, you can make stuff look pretty with pencil, but you and I probably, our first sketches on any project don't look pretty. What do they look like? Why don't you describe what yours look like?
Oh, they're definitely quick. I think the best way to describe my sketches actually is to say they're gestural in a way, almost like a human figure drawing would be. It's very much so the form of what I'm trying to decipher in my head. And then from there, I start fleshing out tones in it. I start figuring out where things need to go. And then it really starts to come together from there. But I mean, I wouldn't say it's a very pretty process to me, unless I'm developing some sort of illustration. But in terms of developing any sort of working product that's a little bit more in depth than an illustration, yeah, no, none of those are very pretty to start out with.
What do you actually do at work? Why don't you describe that, then I'll describe what I do.
I mostly sit around and play computer games. No, I'm kidding. So
wait. But before you begin, what is your title at work?
All right. So I work two different jobs right now. Currently, I am the lead designer at the University of Central Florida's Student Union, where I oversee the visual process. I guess that's the easiest way to put it. And then my other job is through a company in downtown Orlando called reservations.com, and there I am a design intern. So in essence, at the Student Union, I am very much so a generalist. We field a whole bunch of different projects. I oversee the other designer and myself and the work we put out, make sure everything looks on point before we ship it, and really just making sure that we can get things done on time. But at the start of each project, I make sure I'm sketching things out, no matter what the project is. From there, I typically consult with the other designer, and from there we start really just delegating, seeing which tasks we're able to handle, and then executing on them. At my other job, reservations, it's a little bit more specified. All the work that I typically do there is web. So, I mean, I'm developing UI elements, iconography. Right now I'm doing some motion graphics. So I'm able to really dip into my bread and butter skill set there rather than focusing on any sort of print project like I would at the union. And I mean, honestly, I think it's close to the same process. What would you say, Mitch, in terms of starting a print project versus, say, I don't know, starting a UI development project?
I think there's different problems that are being solved and different
Absolutely
constraints.
different problems.
So I sat in on the app project. Your class or classes had to design an app within, like, I think it was a week you guys had.
Well, technically we had more than that, but with Hurricane Irma, the time frame was cut down significantly.
And I got to see some of the work you guys put out. I wish I stayed for more of it. I didn't have a choice, but I got to stay and see a little glimpse of what you guys are working on. I think you guys got to expand on that afterwards, after we got our feedback given to all the students, or after Victor went over it with the guys. But correct me if I'm wrong, you have a couple more weeks to work on that, or you're almost done with that time.
Yeah, so essentially the two designers from NV Labs that came in gave us feedback. And then, as Mitch said, we have a few more weeks to sort of fine-tune what we came out with at the gate.
And I was very pleased with what you came up with. And so there's some kids in that class that really understood it, that had like great insight, that had like really awesome understanding about how functionality works and the importance of simplicity. And there were some that didn't understand how to design for a mobile app, mobile product. And that's okay, because you only had so little time, right? This is most of it was the first time these students actually ever engaged in designing a mobile product, which was amazing. I love seeing that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a cool experience. And I mean, I would have been in the same boat if I hadn't taken on some of the freelance projects and some of the different projects at my internship. But I definitely feel that a lot of people had a good handle on it for their first time going to bat with this type of project. And I really think the only downfall I saw more often than not was just not paying attention to the human interface guidelines that Apple puts out. And that's a relatively easy fix. I mean, it's not rocket science. They're putting it on a website for you to look at and draw from.
Yeah, they have all the assets online, so you can see the rules of the platform, what you should and shouldn't do, what makes most sense through research, what kind of avenues to take, choices to make that might influence your work to create a better product. Yes, Apple, Google, Microsoft, they all have their own kind of guidelines for how that plays out. I mean, there's so many aspects of it. But as of now, it's understood that user experience design is broad, but encompasses how somebody uses something and how they can. Oh, how would you describe user experience design?
I don't know. I mean, I do agree with you that everything is experience design. That's definitely making it more of a controversial term in today's day and age.
Well, that makes it harder for me to describe what I do because my title is at IBM is user experience designer. But
I feel like there's a huge, I'm not sure if I would call it a gap between what people would perceive that as versus a design researcher. Because I mean, those are, some places will take those as interchangeable terms. Other places, I mean, you've got more of a historian or somebody that actually goes out and does user testing as your design researcher, and then somebody that fulfills even more in a sense of visual, like an interface designer sort of skill set as their UX designer.
User interface designer versus user experience designer.
Yeah.
What comes first?
I mean,
chicken or the egg?
even that has a lot of gray area. I mean, you can almost even dive into like, how would you differentiate that from a front end? Because there's some people out there that say designers should code. There's some people out there that say, no, let the developers code, let the designers design. Otherwise, you're going to lose some of the creativity and you're not going to attract the right kind of designers to learn those positions and take on roles in that field.
So is code design?
It is communication.
So
I actually heard that there are some schools out there that are now offering it as a second language.
I have heard that.
Wish that was me in high school.
I wish that was me too. I would so take that. Back onto the titles, user experience, user interface. I guess I went from visual to user interface where I created application, what's the word? I guess you can call it the window to how you see the world, meaning that it allows for people to give it an input and then they can receive an output through this interface. So describing what user interface is, you can say that user experience, like imagine eating cereal. User experience is the whole experience of enjoying the cereal. User interface is the spoon and the bowl, whereas the cereal is the content. The content and the milk is the content. That bowl holds the content, and you can move that bowl around. So you have the interaction of giving it an input and receiving an output or a reaction. And the spoon allows you to transmit that cereal and milk into your stomach. So the tool that helps you interact is the user interface, and the user experience is the grand overall scheme, the feelings, the process, the flow, the, I guess, architecture, or information architecture, the branding of it. You know, why would you buy that cereal? Why would you buy that bowl and that spoon? Yeah.
No, I really like that. And I mean, I guess you could almost say that a product designer would be the table and the chair in that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, they can also...
I mean, that brings up another point. I mean, where do product designers fit into all of this? They themselves encompass a lot of UI and UX.
So I'm personally against titles in the sense that I don't think our industry has not evolved enough to identify exactly what these titles are. Like each company has their own definition of what these titles mean because of those companies' needs. And that causes a problem because when you go out to hire somebody, you might hire the wrong person. You have to vet out more people because you may have given a too generalist of a job application. You might have posted something too general that too many people who don't fit the requirements apply to.
I agree with you. I mean, I love whenever you're searching job boards and you see companies putting out like a UI/UX designer, and you're like, okay, so basically I'm doing the research, doing the design, hell, maybe even coding,
Yeah, definitely.
It's still the sense that there's so much gray area still out there is why I completely agree with you that titles sort of, I guess, hinder the ability to hire the right people. You're definitely right there. It adds an extra step that doesn't need to be there.
Well, also on the flip side, how do you know what they do if you don't have a title, right? So you have your work, but how do you describe what you did on that project? You would have to write a whole essay explaining what you did step by step, whereas the title kind of just is a glimpse at a high level of what you're capable of doing. But we all don't understand fully what each title encompasses. We don't. Like user experience, user interface, product design, although they are different, so many people confuse those. And then you got visual design, which is way off over there, that has little to do with what I guess you would call a content designer or I'm trying to find a different type of designer in the same industry that I guess copyright now. As I don't know, I'm losing words. What I'm trying to say is this: the titles don't necessarily represent the work, and being able to wear multiple hats, where you can go from designing the information architecture to designing the icons that represent the different views or pages that you're on, or the method of input with the interaction. So how that icon is clicked, why it's in that position on that part of the screen, that composition, why is it that size, and the reaction when you touch it. You know, there's so many different overlap. There's so much overlap that
Yeah, I agree with you.
yeah, and it's confusing. It confuses me every day.
One like really obvious example for say people out there that don't actually design that may be listening in is, say you have somebody working on a team that does motion design. Okay, that's a pretty general term. I mean, you could throw them on an animation project and that would be completely different than, say, if you had them on say, I don't know, designing a new mobile interface for your website where they're working on hover interactions. But both can be encapsulated by that term, motion designer. So the titles aren't absolutely fleshed out, and because of it, people do have to wear a lot of different hats, and people do have to do their looking into what they actually do themselves.
So what I do, sorry, I'm still swallowing that last sip of whiskey. Ugh. God, why did I drink that? Such a regret. So many regrets. So what I do, I create experiences that are digital. I draw assets. I create the flow, the information architecture. I guess I don't want to say copywriting because I'm not good at that, but the content that represents the Chrome, the interface in which you understand how to interact with it. So going from the home screen to the profile, understanding how to get there, understanding where that is in the mental model. Iconography, illustration, there's so much that it encompasses. I can't really describe what I do because I do so much, and I'm sure you do so much. But in a sense, we create things that people use to either solve a problem or live their lives.
And we do it in an intuitive way that shows that we've done our research to see how they would like it presented to them.
Right, so we do it in a way that is geared towards them.
Yes, sort of understanding your audience, designing for accessibility, as you mentioned earlier.
Understanding the psychology that goes into it.
Yes, there's a lot of psychology behind everything that's designed, whether people see it or whether it's very subtle. It's always there.
Yeah, there's a lot of science that goes into it. So it's not just making it look pretty. There's a science to it.
Absolutely. You think we should move on and talk about our experience from last week?
All right, Creative Jam. Let's jam.
Woo, woo.
Congratulations on winning the award, sir.
Congratulations to you as well, sir.
For those of you who don't know, Logan and I paired up to take on Adobe's Creative Jam. What is it, like a competition that came to our school, and both of us, what was the award we won? Like what category did we win?
Okay, so the award we won was it was for the UX design category, and it was the Judge's Choice Award.
The Judge's Choice Award. And that was a lot of fun, very stressful, more stress than fun, to be quite honest, but the theme that we had to design an app. So our category was to design an app, and which is hard to do within 3 hours when you only have really 2 hours to do it. 1 hour and a half of thinking, like 30 to 45 minutes of actually executing.
And eating. Don't forget
and
about eating.
We also ate, which was very nice of Adobe to provide that food. Thank you, Adobe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adobe.
But the theme that we had to design an app around, or design visually an app flow interface around, was Florida Man.
Yep.
Such a weird topic for a hackathon, creative jam kind of competition.
Yeah, coming from Ohio, I had absolutely no idea what Florida Man was, and I'm glad my partner was a Florida native himself.
I am Florida Man.
Mitch himself is Florida Man.
I am Florida Man. Florida Man, for those of you who don't know, because most people who are not from Florida don't apparently know what this is, but in a sense, everyone actually knows what this is. So yes, there are people from Florida that are men that are from Florida. Get that out of the way. The problem is, in Florida, we're such a screwed up state in the sense that our people have the weirdest dramatic, in this case, arrests than any other state. Which is so funny because there'd be on the news hey, naked man punches baby on bridge, or naked man eats, they're always naked. Naked man eats other man naked while on drugs. Thinks he's a lion. You know what I mean? There's such weird topics of how they got arrested. And so the idea is that Florida Man's a running joke. It's a meme that of course, someone crazy is from Florida. And it might be the heat, the weather.
It's definitely the heat.
It's definitely, or something in the water.
95 degrees on Christmas Day is definitely a factor to Florida Man.
So the topic was Florida Man, and we had to design an app, which, if you want to describe what it was.
So essentially for our viewers, I would describe it as almost like the movie Nerve. In a sense, we started out trying to solve the problem of Florida Man, trying to stop Florida Man from committing these crimes and getting arrested. But then we ran into a few problems with it, and from there we moved on and decided to embrace Florida Man because we love Florida Man, and we developed an app to help Florida Man be the best version of himself possible. So in essence, it's an app based on challenges, leaderboards, and comparing your Florida Man against other Florida men and seeing who is the top Florida man.
Essentially, it's a competition as to who can be a worse person. That was our goal.
Absolutely.
Which is funny how we pivoted from trying to help Florida Man get the care he needs, the assistance, the mental support to not be a bad person. And then we went over to completely making it about being a bad person. So terrible idea, terrible app. Surprised we won. But I'm glad
Agreed.
we won. I mean, I wouldn't be unhappy if we won. Why would I be? Why would I be unhappy? But it was also kind of interesting how the other people they did a video section, a video part of the the event, and then another one was illustration.
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, they had a lot of areas of design and video, and it was really cool just seeing like all the different directions that you could take this pretty specific topic.
Right. Absolutely. It was an adventure. It was stressful. I think I said that. I'll say it again.
The best way to describe it was 3 hours was a time frame that came and passed very quickly, but at the same time, it was an extremely exhausting 3 hours.
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking too. I didn't know we had to present that, which is fine. I don't mind presenting. I think we did a very good job presenting, especially with that glitch.
With the technical difficulties, that made it even better.
Yeah, we had more time to explain our idea, which helped. It aided to our advantage. Not obviously in the popular vote, which we lost, but we had a good time. I had a good time. I know that.
It was great. I really hope I get to do another one of these.
Yeah, you get to do it at Crew to South, right?
Hopefully, yeah. I gotta find myself a partner. So
go get Gina.
Just letting all of our viewers know. Well, yeah. Hopefully, Gina wants to be my partner. If not, we're holding tryouts.
If you have any feedback or comments on how we're doing, what we're talking about, if it's interesting, if it's boring as crap, or maybe you have a resolution to people's titles, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I guess this is the sign off.
This is it.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
See you later.
Thanks for listening, everyone.